Hey, Mike Mike Shabuti. How you doing?
What's up, man? It's good to hear your voice. It's good to hear your voice, and it's good to hear you calling me Shabuti. I always love that.
Yeah, when we worked together back in the day at AAF, I was there, and you came in, and then they introduced you. They said they said this is Mike Shue. I said Mike Shue, and then we started talking, and then we were both old Archie Bunker fans.
Yes,
and I think that's where I got that from. An old episode of All in the Family when he was with the Meathead, and they were telling a story about how when he was young. He lost one of his shoes, and he had to wear one shoe and one boot, and so they used to call him Shabuti. So I started calling you Shabuti because of that.
I know. I remember that. I remember that conversation, and I remember first meeting you. It was right after my interview for part time there with the former PD Dave Douglas, and he said, "Okay, well, why don't we take a tour?" And I remember I drove up from Falmouth to where the studios were in Westboro at the time, listening to you. And I'd never heard you before, and I was loving it. And so I'm like, okay, we're going to go in the air studio. I'm going to meet this Ozone guy. And I'm thinking, by your voice, I thought you looked more like something like Rocco. You know, like you were like 400 pounds, and you had like a big beard and stuff. And I walked in, and it's like, this dude looks like he's that philosophy student guy that never left his house in college. You know, and I was just, whoa, that big voice is coming out of this skinny guy, man. And now you're still in New Orleans, right?
Yeah, I've been in New Orleans for 13 years.
Yeah. Now, you originally moved to, was it Florida to get into the restaurant business? Was that right?
Yeah. After I left AAF, as they say in the business, I went down the hall to WRKO.
Right.
And I co-hosted a morning show with former Congressman Peter Blute.
Oh yes.
And then they had a revolving door of program directors, and they brought in a guy that didn't want anything fun in the morning. He wanted all seriousness, and we used to fight all the time. And so I finished up there a 3-year contract. I almost made it through a 3-year contract, and I decided to take a little bit of time away from radio. I moved down to Miami Beach, Florida. I got a place on the beach, and I opened up a bar and a restaurant with an old college roommate and a guy from Boston, my old friend Steve Flagg from Boston.
Oh yeah, Flagg. Yeah.
Yeah, and so we did that for a couple of years, and then the opportunity came up for me to get back into radio. A guy we used to work with in Boston, a guy named Mike Kramer, he had taken over a group of stations in New Orleans, and right after Hurricane Katrina, they were flipping one of the classic rock stations to talk, and they were looking for hosts. And so he came into my restaurant in Miami. You remember Mike Kramer, right?
Oh yeah, he was our, I believe he was our promotions or marketing director at AAF.
Yeah, the marketing director.
Yeah.
And he comes walking into my bar, my restaurant in Miami Beach one night, and I'm like, "Hey, Kramer, what are you doing down here?" And he said, "Well, my parents live down here." I said, "Oh, that's a shock. You know, you're a Jewish guy, and your old parents live in Florida." I said,
Right,
"Boy, what a shock!" And he said that he just went to New Orleans, and they were flipping one of their stations, and they were looking for talk show hosts, and he asked me if I wanted to get in the business or get back in the business. And right when he asked me that, I was holding a mop, and I was cleaning the bathroom floor in my bar. And I said, I wouldn't mind getting back into radio. Owning the bar is fun, but after a while, it is work. It really is work.
Right, yeah.
And so I did an audition in Miami, and they liked it, and they hired me to do an afternoon talk show in New Orleans, and I did that for over 7 years, and then they had budget cuts, and instead of moving me to the morning show, they fired me. They just ended my job, and then another station here in New Orleans, the same owners who owned AAF, and they said, "Hey, do you want to do the morning show here?" And I said, "Yeah," and so. I've been doing that now for, I'm in my 5th year doing the morning show there on the classic rock station, And just to throw in a little plug, in case you're wondering, the website is bayou957.com. You could check out the show or whatever the case may be, and that's where I am. That's where I've been, and I've been having a good time.
So you love New Orleans. You're I know you're from Connecticut. You're a New Englander, but what is it about that city that makes you want to stay there? Besides the job, which obviously you're liking, but what is it about the Big Easy that you love?
It's a wild city. You know, I had never been here until I got the job here. And so I didn't know. And then I got here not long after Hurricane Katrina, so they were still putting the place back together, you know?
Yeah.
But New Orleans, it's a state of mind as well as being a city. They have an attitude down here that is just wild. It's nothing like the rest of the state of Louisiana. You know, when I got the job, somebody from up in Massachusetts said, "Wow, man, you live in Louisiana?" I said, "No, I don't live in Louisiana. I live in New Orleans."
Right.
Because it's totally different than the rest of the state, and whether it's their attitude, whether it's the food, the music. I mean, obviously New Orleans, I mean, this is where jazz was invented.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's such a hip, cool place, and I think the good definitely outweighs the bad. I mean, it happens to be a fairly rough city. It's always in the top 5 when it comes to murder rate. I think we're one of the few places on earth where someone gets shot every day, and the politics down here are crooked as hell. But that's one of the things that makes it New Orleans. But the good definitely outweighs the bad, and it really is a fantastic city. And for anybody who's listening right now, if you've never been, it's a great place to come for a long weekend or come for Mardi Gras. I've always said that every American should come to at least one Mardi Gras. Now, this year, there was no Mardi Gras.
Yeah, I was going to ask you.
Because of coronavirus.
Yeah, what's Mardi Gras with no people like? I wanted to ask you that.
Nothing. People just hung out in their houses, and because usually literally a million people come into New Orleans, into the city, for Mardi Gras. So we didn't have that this year. So the people that lived here, they just celebrated Mardi Gras in their own yards, in their own homes. They were doing Yardi Gras instead of Mardi Gras.
Nice.
And I mean, it sucked for the local businesses because so many of them depend on that extra million people coming in and spending money, and they really got hurt. But hopefully, by next year we'll be as close to back to normal before all of this craziness with the pandemic started, and we'll be getting back to our lives again.
This week it was actually this past Sunday was 1 year since WAAF had to be shut down, and you joined us, I believe, on one of the last days. I can't remember because I'm quite honest with you, John. Those last 2 days for me were such a blur. And then it was a blur for a couple of months afterwards too. But just to kind of look back and your experience at WAAF and the Ozone, and you mentioned Stephen Flagg, who was part of your show, and there were a lot of characters on your show. There was Wheelchair Fred, and the late great Jason Dooley. Can you pick one moment at AAF where you're most proud or shocked, or something you thought was just hilarious or that you couldn't believe you got away with?
Oh boy, there were so many. Shoe, but besides being on middays from 10 in the morning to 3 in the afternoon, I was also the station's music director.
Yes.
So I got and in that time, so many new bands were coming out, and we were breaking a bunch of them. And it seemed like every other night I was out with friends, people I worked with, the record companies, at different shows. I mean, it was Alice in Chains one night. It was Korn the next night. It was, it never ended. And it was an unbelievable time musically, but not just musically. The stuff we were doing on the show, and I mean, the stuff, geez, we basically had 5 morning shows on WAAF.
Yes.
We had Greg Hill in the morning, and then I came on, and then Opie and Anthony were on after me, and then Rocco was on after him, and then when When Opie and Anthony left, they moved Rocco down after me, and it was we basically had like 5 morning shows going. Plus, we're breaking all of these new bands. We were the first station in the country to play bands like Korn and Godsmack for obvious reasons, because they were from our backyard, as they'd say.
Yes.
But I had so many great times. But one of the most shocking times, I think, was the night of our indoor beach party at the Songus Arena in Lowell, when Disturbed were the headliners that year, and I got arrested in the hotel down the street from the arena because there were so many people in the room, and it smelled funny, and the cops came in and they arrested me, and they took me out of that hotel in handcuffs. And people were chanting, "Ozone, Ozone," as the cops were, like, taking me out. And I was, like, yelling at them. I'm like, "Hey, stop chanting. Can any one of you come down and bail me out?" I said, "I want to come back to this party. I don't want to miss this good time, you know?"
I forgot about that, man. I think me and maybe Carrie are the only 2 people who didn't get arrested during that particular time in AAF history. You know, I mean, LB had 60 days and Bill Ricca, and I believe Hillman got arrested once at an establishment, a gentleman's establishment in this area. And I think Carrie and I were the only ones who didn't get the handcuffs slapped on him. I forgot that happened.
Yeah, you guys are lucky. We really did live the life. I mean, that was our life. And you know, looking back now, my life is so boring compared to that. I mean, obviously we've all gotten older, but I thought that was how life was going to be all the time.
Yeah.
And then I left AAF, and I'm like, wait a minute, life isn't like that all the time. Yeah, isn't it funny what we can remember, like the Shibuti thing and that? I can't remember what I had for lunch yesterday.
Right.
But I mean, I can remember specifically so much of that stuff from back then.
We're talking to John Osterlind here. He's a WAAF veteran, and he's working down in radio in New Orleans now. But one of the best things I ever saw you do, just for as a radio nerd perspective, was there was a day you had the Ozone Cafe, and that's when you would have live bands in. And there was a day you had 2 really new young bands. One was Nickelback, and the other one was Three Doors Down, who both bands later became pretty big, especially Nickelback, and they became so big, like everything else that becomes giant in America, you got to start tearing it down after a while.
Yep.
But then you also had Stone Temple Pilots. You had Scott Weiland and you had Dean DeLeo, and they were going to come in and play acoustic. And this was like, I think it was just weeks after, maybe not even, after Scott Weiland got out of jail. And so I remember I was kind of hanging in the studio waiting for them to come in, and you were talking to I think it was either their manager or their record company person, and they were like, "Listen, don't ask them about prison, and don't ask them about drugs. Please, no prison, no drugs." And you're like, "Oh, yeah, okay, no problem." So they sit down, they tune up, everyone says hi, you crack the mic, and the first thing you say, "Scott, tell me, is prison a good place to kick drugs?" That was the first thing out of your mouth. And I saw the dude's face, and he just looked down at the floor, and I had to put my hands over my mouth from just laughing my ass off. And Scott Weiland didn't even bat an eye. He just went, "You know what? I'll tell you, it's not." And then he talked about it. I got to tell you, man, that was a ballsy thing, and that kind of encapsulates the attitude of that radio station at that time. It was like, yeah, you're going to have to deal with some stuff here if you're going to come into this radio station.
Yeah, I don't know if it was the walls of the building or whatever the case may be. When I was on AAF, the last thing you ever wanted to do was say, "Don't do this," or "Please don't say this." Because if you're saying that, we're thinking we're like kids.
Yeah.
You know, we're thinking, well, geez, there must be a reason why he's saying that. Let's give it a shot. You know?
All right, John Osterlind, ladies and gentlemen. John, thank you so much for checking in. I really appreciate it. I'm glad you're loving where you are right now in New Orleans. I'm glad you're at a job you love, and I'm glad you're on the air, because I'll tell you, you were one of my role models, one of my idols. I learned a lot from you, and I'm glad you're still doing it, man.
Well, Mike, congratulations on your new gig, doing mornings on the Pike there in Worcester, and I wish you nothing but the best. I've always been a big fan of your work too. I think you're great. I miss the people up in Massachusetts. I think I'll always be part masshole. But I wish you the best. And I know you're working with a guy who did overnights when I was working at AF for a little while, Chuck Perks.
Yeah.
How about that? Tell him I said hi. I know Bob Goodell is in charge over there.
Mm-hmm.
Tell Bob I said hi. And, I think about you guys, and I'll never forget you. And like I said, I miss Massachusetts. I miss the times we had up there and the people, the friends I made. I still keep in touch because of social media with a bunch of people. But, I wish you nothing but the best, and I'm so happy for you, and I think your radio station got a great host.
Awesome. Thanks, John.